Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. Today, I am delighted to talk to Arnold Yasin Mol. You are most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh.
It's great to have you on. Yasin is lecturer in comparative theology and philosophy of religion at the Islamic University of Applied Sciences in Rotterdam, and PhD fellow and lecturer in philosophy and Islamic studies at the Leiden University Institute for Philosophy. He also regularly contributes to the Yasin Institute for Islamic Research in the States, obviously. Now, today we are asking, what is Laylatul Qadr as a cosmological and temporal event? What does the sending down of revelation, i.e. the Qur'an, and fate mean in relation to our existence? And from what worldview are we understanding these concepts? It's a profound question, I think. And inshallah, in this talk, Yasin will discuss the theological and philosophical concepts involved with Laylatul Qadr as a way to better understand the classical Islamic worldview and to ask ourselves how much of it we can understand today. So this is bringing two, perhaps, paradigms into relationship. So over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So when we discussed about doing a blog together, we took Laylatul Qadr as one of the examples we could use as a discussing point. So I've written on this, I've published on this, on the idea of Laylatul Qadr in Kalam and Tafsir. And that's a publication from 2017, 7 years ago. And in that phase, I really looked at it. In what way is Laylatul Qadr the idea of sacred time? In what way is it, how does it differentiate itself from normal time as we experience day by day? And so one of the things that, of course, and also what is interesting about, of course, Laylatul Qadr is itself that although there's a dominant opinion, it's on the 27th of Ramadan, at the same time, there's also different opinions about it's the odd nights, it's the even nights, the first 10, the middle 10, later 10. And so one of the things I've done is look at, what is this ambiguity with sacred time? You know, something we don't experience with normal time. It either is or it's not, you know? So I used it as a case study back then to look at in what way is revelation involved? Because the main idea is that Laylatul Qadr is the night where the Qur'an is revealed, but also the surah that is linked to Laylatul Qadr, Surah Al-Qadr, chapter 97 of the Quran, is also understood that it brings down fate, your Qadr of the year, you know, so there's therefore also Laylatul Qadr. So it's Laylatul Qadr is bigger than only revelation, and it's not only an historical event, like it's not simply Laylatul Qadr happened 1400 years ago. And so one of the things that I tried to discuss in my research article on it is, okay, what then is how does revelation add to this idea that it's sacred time? And we're going to go into that. So the idea that it's a temporal event, something that occurs in time. But it also occurs within a cosmology, within space, because it is ascending down. So something also, it's also movement. It's not only a time lapse. It is also something is moved from A to B. And then at the same time, you get this idea that it moves, you know, every year Laylatul Qadr can be in a different place in Ramadan. And even there are even certain traditions that even say Ramadan, that Laylatul Qadr can also happen outside of Ramadan. There are traditions that say that every revelation, you know, not only of our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but also the other, like Musa and Isa ﷺ, that their revelations all happened on Laylatul Qadr. So is Laylatul Qadr then a sort of an event that it always happens on the same date in our calendar? Or is it sort of this event that is spread out over in a sense, over our time periods, and there can be multiple Laylatul Qadrs, etc. So these are the things that I try to research in my article. And And over the last 7 years, also teaching more on Islamic philosophy and theology, and also especially philosophy of religion at Leiden University and Islamic University of Applied Sciences. I also started to discuss more about what type of worldview are we talking about. So what is not only in what type of larger picture of the world are we talking about where these events can happen? And are we as Muslims also very much aware of them or not? Especially when you dive into the classical tradition, the intellectual tradition. So in falsafa, in Islamic philosophy, and in ilm al-kalam, in Islamic theology, they have highly sophisticated discussions about cosmology, worldview, the different structures of it. And one of the things that I notice of is that most Muslims, of course, are very much unaware, uninformed about this, but also because they're uninformed about this, these are very difficult discussions. Within those sciences is that, and these very complex discussions are also very difficult to explain to a non-expert. And also then it can create confusion. So you also have to be very much careful and aware that sort of you don't make things worse, you know. But one of the things I try to do in especially my classes on philosophy of religion is, are you aware from which paradigm, from sort of which worldview structure we're looking at things? How do we understand the act of revelation? How do we understand the idea of fate is sent down to you? The idea of prayer, the idea of that you pray and that it is an interaction between you and God. What do we mean by that? So what is sort of in which type of existence, what type of structure does this all occur in? So, and that larger look at structure, that larger look at the ontology and the structures of existence, that's what we call metaphysics. Yeah. The metaphysics is the total view of something. Yeah. So we're going to look at Laylatul Qadr as a case study, the metaphysics of Laylatul Qadr, and then look at how cosmology and time, or space and time, how these are involved with these. And maybe, inshallah, that also through looking at Laylatul Qadr, we can better understand the Islamic worldview, how it was envisioned by the classical traditional scholars. Okay. So let's start up with that question. What is Laylatul Qadr as a cosmological event, as a temporal event? So what does it mean that Laylatul Qadr happens every year in our calendar? And we, of course, we flag it as the most dominant position, it being the 27th of Ramadan, and there are multiple opinions about that, but the idea is it happens in Ramadan, and it is a special temporal event, but also something happens. The angels are sent down. So there's also this spatial event that is going on. And the idea, of course, Laylatul Qadr is the moment that the Qur'an was revealed. Okay, but the Quran was revealed. I also teach Ulum al-Quran, the Quranic sciences. The Quran was revealed in a time period of 23 years, between 20 and 25 years. So did it all occur on Laylatul Qadr? But when we look at the Asbab an-Nuzul tradition, that is the reasons of revelation. So we have traditions, historical traditions, that discuss, that tell us that, when the Prophet ﷺ was on his camel going to this place, revelation came. This person was saying something, and then revelation came. And that was throughout the whole year. So is Laylatul Qadr then throughout the whole year, or is something else going on? Did the Quran come as piecemeal or not? So this is something I try to sort of try to piece out, like what's going on here, because if Laylatul Qadr is the main event of revelation, how then do we understand this revelation over time, that in a 20+ year period, and also outside of Ramadan, outside of the period that we call Laylatul Qadr? Also, when we talk about that every year your Qadr, your person, the Qadr of your year is sort of sent down to you. What does that even mean? So, and where does it go to? Sort of, it's downloaded on you, it goes into your backpack. What do we mean by that? So this is one of the things we can look at to better understand the worldview of Islam. One of the interesting things about the classical type of metaphysics, the idea in classical pre-modern philosophy and theology, is this time itself. It's not seen as this sort of abstract, detached thing from space. So this, what we now also call in physics space-time continuum, also existed in pre-modern thought. Why? Because they viewed time as motion, as movement. The idea is that you can measure time because a thing went from A to B, and that sort of this movement itself is what we call time. And it already shows as well that time then is relative, because if something can move faster, the motion can move faster, the time becomes faster. But also it is observer dependent. So now quantum physics comes in. This idea that you observe time, and there are some ideas by certain Muslim philosophers like Ibn Rushd, for example, that discuss that time, therefore, is soul dependent. It's dependent on an observer, but also is an observer that understands the idea of time. So it has to be a human soul, an higher intelligent being that can experience time as such, not simply live in time, live in motion, like, for example, most animals, but also really experience the event as a temporal event. So then, does time even exist out of space, out of movement, but also does time even exist without humans in that sense? So these were discussions that were going on among Muslim philosophers and theologians.
Because we have that, sorry to interrupt, we have the sense in the Quran which says, for God, a day can be X number of thousands of years.
Yes.
We have a sense of divine time, which is definitely not human time, and indeed quite different in its duration. So the sense of the relativity of time as well, in that absolute sense.
Yeah, and of course, then when you say divine time, that already becomes very tricky, of course, because time, if it is connected to movement means change. God, Allah, is not defined by change. So therefore, he does not exist. He exists duni zaman, duni makan. He exists outside of time and outside of place. So when we say that, when we even, the term divine time itself becomes problematic, and it was also one of the main discussions between the Muslim philosophers and the Muslim theologians, is that the Muslim theologians would emphasize that God exists without time. So he's not defined. So even eternity, divine eternity, is not eternity as in duration, as in that something never ends. That's something that is, for example, when we enter the hereafter, then we enter into eternity, but eternity as duration. The idea that it's time that has no ending. But with God, he doesn't have eternity as duration itself.
Yeah,
he's eternal without beginning and without end, because he's not defined by motion. He's not defined by change or movement. So even the 70,000 years, then, how do we understand it?
So I was just saying that there's the hadith, I think, where, and I don't pretend to understand the hadith, where it refers to God as time. God is time. I quite like in some Christian philosophy of religion, it talks about the difference between eternity and the everlasting. So the everlasting is the quantitative duration of time as we understand it, and eternity being a qualitatively different substance, for want of a better term. Just trying to separate out the temporal, in our sense of succession, one thing after another, to a quite different dimension of understanding of time. But that may not help.
No, the thing is that already in Arabic because that hadith uses dahar, so the idea of dahar. While, for example, zaman is the idea of motion, time that is connected to motion. But with dahar is understood not simply as time, but as this idea of time as a concept. So that hadith has multiple explanations. We're going to not go into that. But again, yes, so there were even Muslim philosophers and theologians that try to differentiate different types of timing, and that eternity, so divine eternity is then a divine time without it being connected to endings or beginnings or motions.
Yeah.
But of course, and everything that is created, so anything other than God, it cannot have divine eternity, because everything other than God is defined by shape, limits, beginning, endings.
At a beginning and an end. So by definition, it's continuous and temporal because it has a beginning.
Exactly. Yeah. So there, you had, for example, Mirdad. He was the teacher of Mullah Sadra, so the 7th century famous Muslim philosopher. And Mirdad was talking about at least 8 to 10 different definitions of time, for example.
Wow.
So, and we're not going to go into that, or we're not going to go into those fully. But the idea is that there are different, what we call temporal modes, different modes of time we can experience and can exist in. And this is exactly the whole point, is what is Laylatul Qadr then? But the thing is that something is sent down. So that's a movement, and the movement creates time. If the thing that is sent down is a sort of sacred thing, it's something special, then the time it creates is not normal time. It is also something special. So now we can see also this connection that what is sent down, and the main opinion is that with Laylatul Qadr, revelation is sent down, and for us, as in relation to Muslims, in relation to our Prophet, alayhi salam, it is about the Qur'an being sent down, and also our fate, our Qadr. So what is sent down is special. As what is sent down is special, it is sacred. It is what is fadila. It is something extraordinary and special, as the Arabic terminology would use. The idea of that it is something not kudus, as in that is normally how sacred would then be applied, or something that is haram, something that is special and taboo. But the idea is, the term that is used is fadila. It is something that is extra special. What is extra special? The Quran is extra special. Your fate is extra special. So the thing that is moved, the thing that creates movement, or the created thing that is moving is special. It is fadila. It is what we call then sacred for us. And so the time that it creates is also special. It is sacred. And this is exactly what we see. So it's different from our movement. And even when we pick up a book or we pick up the Quran and we move it, so we move it from this part of the table to the other table. So although the object is moved, technically the movement we do is not specifically sacred. But at the same time, when we recite the Quran or when we read the Quran, and that has also certain special type of movements with our mouth, with our eyes, our thoughts. Those are special. They're not normal. Reading the Quran is not the same as reading a book, So these create special type of time. And this is exactly what I want to explore further. So first of all, then we have to look at one of the the dominant ideas about Islamic cosmology as it became developed within Islamic thought. Is that this became very popular, especially among Muslim theologians that also were very active when it came to tasawwuf, when it came to Sufi metaphysics, Sufi thought. But this is also something that is seen as not simply as something that is spiritual, or it's not simply mystic theology. This was seen as really cosmology. This was about reality, about ontology, about existence. And they differentiated between 3 main layers, main degrees of existence.
Can I just pause you? I'm sorry, this is such an important thing you're doing. I apologize. It just occurred to me that as Wesley, you and I are both converts to Islam, and something you might have noticed as well, being born and brought up in the West. When people talk about, mainly Christians actually, and perhaps other people talk about God and angels and whatnot, it's usually understood in the public space as being a private opinion. So I had this notion that there is a God, or this belief, this idea in my head that that angels exist. But the reason I stress this is because what you're talking about and what Islam is incredible. That was one of the reasons that attracted me to Islam in the first place. Is that this Islamic cosmology, this metaphysics, basically, is not a private opinion. It's not an idea in our heads. It is objective, factual, absolute, real with a capital R, reality, and it's not an opinion. It is the structure of existence itself, the ontology of all things. And that's missing in the West now, where it's become so privatized and subjectivized that it becomes one opinion amongst others. But Islamically, it's not. It is as real as anything. It is the most real, actually. And so this is not really, do you see what I mean? So it's a different atmosphere that we inhabit as Muslims in the West, I think, when we move towards a metaphysics, a cosmology, which is profoundly real, as opposed to the religious opinions of a religious person who privately has a feeling about something. It's a very different atmosphere we inhabit, but it's to do with what's real and what's objective, I think. Do you see what I mean? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, and if we look at these three layers of existence that make up the Islamic worldview, the lowest one is simply the physical universe.
Yeah.
Is where we exist in. So, and there's where we have our bodies, we have physical matter, energy, etc., the natural laws, all the physics.
That's what science deals with.
Yeah. And so, like you said, everybody's stuck in this, stuck in the mulk. Everybody's stuck in the alama shahada, the observed world, the seen world, the empirical world. So we're all stuck in the same cage in that sense. Mm-hmm. And we, from an Islamic worldview perspective, we also believe that beyond the mulk, beyond the alama shahada, you also have the alam al-ghaib, the unseen world, which was also termed the idea of malakut, where, and this is important, is that it is a creation. It's an alam. If it's an alam, it's not Allah. And this is something a lot of people misunderstand, that Allah is ghaib. He's part of the unseen, but he's not part of the alam al-ghaib. Because the alam is defined by limits. It is a created world. It's a created realm. So the alam al-ghaib has our souls exist in that. Our bodies are here, and our souls are in the alam al-ghaib. Yeah, this is also where, for example, the ideas of punishment of the grave, etc., those occur in the alam al-ghaib. But for everybody here, the physical universe is the same thing. So like you said, people then can say, oh, God is an opinion, the idea of that angel exists is an opinion, because we're all stuck in the mulk, we're all stuck in the alama shahada, and it is technically, nobody really experiences the effects of the alam al-ghaib, of the unseen world. So of course, we believe that, for example, jinn interact with us, angels interact with us. But the thing is that you cannot measure those interactions in a way that you can measure things in the physical world itself. And that's one of the main problems then, is that our metaphysics, our cosmology, our worldview can explain things that are unexplained. And will always be unexplained based on physical measures, physical criteria. These will always be unexplained. But the thing is that because you cannot prove the unseen world, or at least you can make it rational. Its existence can be rationalized, but it can never be proven in the same way as the physical world. So I can prove exoplanets exist, although I've never visited them. But the thing is with the malakut, with the alam al-ghaib, is it is rational to think about them. These are rational types of existences, but you cannot prove them in the same way as I can prove this pen. So a non-Muslim, a Buddhist, an atheist, we can all agree on this pen. But what we cannot do is then, for example, agree on if angels exist or not. So Buddhists have their own ideas of spiritual beings, etc.
I would say it's a slightly different take. I had this discussion with an atheist, a very bright chap at Speaker's Corner several weeks ago. That I said to him, because obviously he was skeptical of the existence of God. He was an atheist. I said to him that there are certain things that you absolutely take for granted that exist, although you cannot prove that they exist. And of course, he had no idea what I was talking about. And I said, actually, the existence of a world independent of our minds, a mind-independent universe, for example, how can you prove that it exists? Because the very proofs that you might exist, like experiments, are the very thing which we are assuming exists, such that we can even assert that they exist. And the other thing is the existence of conscious minds. Now, we can see the effects of mind, we think, but we can't prove that actual conscious beings, i.e. yourself, myself, exist. But we only we see what we think are the effects of minds. So my argument to him was that he accepts on faith these two properties, and there are other things, they're not just those two, as deep axiomatic articles of faith, without actual ever proof. In this, you use the word proof, that's why I was latching on to this, but he accepts that they exist. Now, he quibbled and wriggled a bit and wasn't happy with what I was saying, but he didn't really have a comeback, in my opinion. So I think belief in God for us is another axiomatic, I mean, this is epistemology, by the way, it's a different subject, but I just want to say that it's not just the things that we can't prove, like angels, that are a religious thing. There's also secular people take things on trust, like the existence of a mind-independent universe, which are unprovable as well. I would argue. I know.
Yeah, the thing is, when it comes to that, is that, and this is something that Muslim philosophers and theologians already discussed more than 1,000 years ago, is that proving God is more easier than proving angels. And simply because God is a necessary explanation for the existence of the mulk, of the physical world. You cannot explain the alam al-shahada without a primary cause, without an ultimate source of existence itself.
Yeah.
So God, and then this is what we call the God of the philosophers, which is technically, the idea of God as needed to explain existence.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily identify God as the God of Islam or the God of the philosophers, that he's theistic or deistic, that he has a personality or not, that he wills things or not, etc. But God is more easier to prove as a necessary, needed concept than angels, because you can rationalize angels as possible beings, but you cannot rationalize them as necessary beings. Yeah. So this is one of the things that in Islamic theology, they differentiated, of course, between the aqliya, the rational concepts, and those that are sama'a, that those are based on the samiyat, those are based on revelation. We only know about the reality of jinn because it was revealed to us. Because until that time, it was different religions, different worldviews, discuss, of course, spirit beings. You see them all over in the history of religions, in the history of beliefs. And the idea of jinn, the way the pre-Islamic Arabs discuss jinn, is not 100% the same way as how the Quran and how the Sunnah discuss jinn. So although the same label is used, jinn, the pre-Islamic jinn had a sort of different identity than the jinn, how it's explained by the Quran and Sunnah. Why? Because revelation explains, and even then we still don't know a lot of things, but at least we know more than before, is that that revelation, the Samiyat, provided us with information that you can rationalize because these are possible in existence. We can talk about flying elephants. Imagine that the Quran would discuss about flying elephants, then you and I had to believe in them, So that, for example, in the alam al-ghaib, in the unseen world, jinn fly, unseen elephants. Look at Burak, the steed that was, which was a very special creation that was used by the Prophet ﷺ to go to the highest heavens. If you look at it, it looks like a mythical creature, etc. The only reason we believe in it and if we believe it is real is simply because revelation, Samiyat, explained it to us, told us. From a rational perspective, Burak is possible. It is a possible being. So you cannot say it's impossible. that is from a logical point of view, that's not a correct statement. It is possible that it exists. It is unlikely that it exists simply based on natural causation. But for God to create Burak, and that he would create jinn, that he would create angels, these are all rationally possible, because he did not create impossible beings. He created unnatural beings, those that are not logical from a natural framework within the alama shahada, within the physical universe. In our physical realm, these are weird, unnatural beings. But in the metaphysical universe, in the malakut, alam al-ghaib, these are possible beings. But God, the existence of God itself, can be proven more than the existence of angels. And this is one of the main things, is there are more people that believe in God than those that believe in angels. That those believe in special beings. Which is also why it's part of our arkan al-iman. It's part of our parts of belief, our pillars of faith. Because to believe in God is easy from a philosophical perspective. But to believe that also he does things that are weird from our physical universe perspective, people have issues with that. Of course, there are also now even people that say, I believe in angels, but they don't believe in God. Yes. But those are an oddity. But you see this very much in New Age religions and postmodernity.
Also, there's recent academic surveys that most atheists, I read in the Times newspaper, believe in the supernatural. Self-described atheists, they might believe in life after death, or angels, or fate, or supernatural good and evil. But most atheists actually do believe in one or more of these things. So even that category is not apparent as to what they really believe. So, but they don't believe in God. So they believe in some may believe in angels and call themselves atheists.
Exactly. So they don't believe in the ilahut. They don't believe in divine existence. They don't believe God by himself, but they do believe in sort of supernatural things. Yeah. But without seeing that God is necessary for it, or that it is that it identifies with a certain religion. So the idea of having what we call atheist spirituality or atheist supernaturalism is by itself not illogical from that perspective. So, but of course, the interesting thing is those that say, I believe in angels but not in God, the only reason that they can believe in the idea of angels is because there was a religion that informed the culture they live in. So you and I, like you said, we're converts, we come from a Western background. So imagine if you were an atheist. We can only be atheist as in opposition towards Christianity, because, we don't check off all the gods in Hinduism or all the type of supernaturalism that is believed in Chinese religions or Buddhism or etc. And even a lot of Western Buddhisms, in Western forms of Buddhism, they deleted most of the metaphysics, most of the supernatural beliefs of Eastern Buddhism. So this is the thing, is that which is most important as a Muslim when it comes to Tawheed, the idea that we purify our beliefs in relation to divine oneness, has to also a lot to do with, do we understand the structure of the reality we exist in? Do we understand this differentiation between divine existence, metaphysical universe, physical universe? A lot of people think that God exists in this plane, that angels exist in the same sort of realm as God himself. No, God is not defined by limits. He's not defined by time, spatiality, motion, or anything else. Well, angels are. So how can they exist on the same type of level of existence? A lot of people, and this is, for a lot of Muslims, this is very difficult to understand. And this is also one of the main issues within Islamic theology, that we are careful not to create confusion with the common Muslim, with the common believer. So to create shak, to create confusion and doubt is one of the biggest crimes, which is also why kalam, ilm kalam as a science, Islamic theology as a science, should not be taught in all details to common believers, because it would only confuse them and create doubts. So what I try to do here is sort of give those elements of Islamic theology that take away doubt, I hope. So I pray for that. So our worldview is structured in this way. You have the physical universe, the mulk, the alama shahada. So that's the physical world, our universe we exist in. So the Big Bang universe that we believe in, that's the alama shahada. That because we can observe it, it is empirical. So it has bodies as in our physical bodies, our natural biological bodies. But the idea is that atoms are bodies, matter are bodies. The idea is that it has spatial forms of existence that we can measure, we can observe through our hawas, to our senses. These are empirical forms of existence. Even gravity itself. So when I drop my pen, we can observe it in an empirical way. So it has an empirical existence. The metaphysical universe, this is where all things that are not, that are although these are interconnected, these are connected to our physical universe. They don't have an existence within the physical universe by itself that we can measure it. So although, of course, we are informed that jinn and angels can take on physical forms in our universe, those are mimicry. Those are, in a sense, for us, that type of are illusions, because they truly exist in the alam al-ghaib, in the unseen world. And also, for example, our souls exist in that. So what is death? Death is when the connection, the silla between our body and our soul is disconnected. This is also the reason why sleep is called the little death, because when you sleep, your soul can experience things in the alam al-ghaib, which of course sort of get special information from the alam al-ghaib, which you cannot get when you are awake, because when you're awake, your soul is confined to your senses and to your what we call the internal senses. But when you are asleep and when you are in dream mode, you have access to the malakut, to the alam al-ghaib, and there, so you have what we call memory dreams. So those are dreams where your soul processes the events of the day, where what we call your material intellect is interacting with your soul intellect. But there are also special dreams where your soul experiences things directly from the alam al-ghaib. And this is also the reason why dreams are sort of the last forms of prophethood, the last forms of revelation in that sense. And then we have divine existence, God by himself, undefined by limits, spatiality, place, or anything that we can understand in that sense. Let's move on, because what then is Laylatul Qadr? If we say that revelation comes down, how does it come down? Does it come down from the ilahut, from divine existence, towards the metaphysical universe, the unseen world, and then to the seen world? How does this work? So, first of all, to understand this, we first need to understand the mode we think in. In what mode do we think? And what mode do we experience our surroundings? Personally, what I believe is that, based on psychology of religion, is that we are not in the same paradigm, the same metaphysical mode every time. And what is then the whole thing of tazkiyah an-nafs, the whole idea of purifying yourself, and the idea to ikhlas, the idea of purify yourself? I see it as, the way I understand the classical scholars in the way they discuss it, is that the whole idea of ikhlas itself is to make sure that you are constantly in the right psychology, in the right psychological mode. And the right psychological mode is theism. So theism is defined by the existence of God, divine agency. God transcends and exists apart and independent from creation. So ilahut, the idea of divine existence, as God by himself. Therefore, there's a difference between creation and creator. These are separate ontologies. Creation is defined by limits, beginning, endings, etc. God, Allah, is not defined by beginning, endings, etc. Yeah? So you have theism is defined where you have Ilahut and the created worlds of Malakut and Mulk. These, of course, are mainly represented by the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And what we see, I teach comparative theology, is that Islam has an absolute form, a radical theism. So when Islam itself emphasizes this differentiation between creator and creation in an utmost way, without any confusion or sort of, let's say, special events like in Christianity with the incarnation.
Yeah. You get that sense in the Quran over and over about how not to associate beings or other gods, in inverted commas, with the one true God. Radical monotheism, absolutely.
And if you think about that as well, what is shirk is that, and this is important as well, most religions and most superstitions, most false beliefs, link the malakut, link the alam al-ghaib with the ilahut. So they link God with angels and jinn, as if they exist in the same type of realm. So although there are other religions that also believe in God, they believe in God the creator, the way they talk about that God is that as if he exists within creation, not outside of it. So this is what we call acosmological or cosmological paradigms. So in philosophy of religion, in comparative philosophy of religion, this is how we differentiate between religions. So you have religions that are theistic, where God exists outside of, apart, not even outside, because outside is a direction. Yeah, we say, Laysa jiha, Allah is without direction. You cannot define him by direction. Yeah, no up and down or outside or inside, etc. So the idea that even say God is everywhere, in Christianity that's allowed. In Islam, it's not. You cannot say God is everywhere because that's defining a place for God. We don't do that. So
often I notice in popular dawah, you get when Christians assert that God is everywhere, omnipresent. Muslims often say, "What? He's even in the toilet?" You know, this is the kind of standard shock therapy, basically, to wake them up. But anyway.
Exactly that. So we radically differentiate, separate creator and creation in a radical way, more than even Christianity's. Although some philosophical theologies of Christianity, like Thomism, Thomas of Aquino, a lot of these also sort of use also this radical monotheism, radical theism on paper itself, but it conflicts with a lot of other elements in Christian belief. This is also why the Trinity and also the incarnation itself doesn't make sense in theism. This also is acknowledged, for example, by Thomas of Aquino, which says we can only believe in the incarnation or even the Trinity simply because the Bible informs us. The New Testament says so. So they even have to acknowledge there are limits to sort of the theism. Their theism has philosophically, their theism has defects in it in that sense. So Islam sort of solves a lot of these issues. Although, and this is important as well, there also, for example, when it comes to divine names, there are identities of God mentioned in the Quran, which from a philosophical perspective would not make sense by itself. So in philosophy, we can identify God as creator, as absolute, as all-aware, all-knowing, all-powerful, because that is what you need if you have a creator. Philosophically, a creator God makes sense. You need these attributes, these qualities to have a creator God. But do you also need a creator God that, for example, is the destroyer, that is also the tester? So that God tests you is something that is not needed from a creator God. So this is also why the philosophical God is technically a very minimal type of theism, what we call minimal theism, because it is deistic. The creator God doesn't necessarily need an identity and a personality to will things.
I noticed when the famous English philosopher Anthony Flew, who had been an atheist for years and years, probably one of the world's leading atheist philosophers, when he changed his mind and he wrote a book about it, why I'm no longer deny God's existence, or I forget the name of it, but why there is a God. he converted to a kind of Aristotelian deism.
Yes.
So it wasn't the God that we are speaking of, who not only has the attributes of a creator, but as you say, the destroyer and so on. But it was a very kind of bloodless, deistic, remote.
God is a force. So because you see this also with a lot of astrophysicists like Einstein and Michio Kaku,
Right.
Paul Davies. They're all they end up with the philosophical God because. So they believe in God the Creator, which, interesting enough, I'm trained in the Hanafi Maturidi form of theology, where we make a differentiation between believing in Wujud al-Khaliq or Wujud al-Sana'i, that Amana bi Wujud al-Sana'i, that you believe in the manufacturer, that you believe in the existence of the Creator, in the Maker, and the idea of Amana bi Wujud Allah, because Allah is the complete perspective of God with all his attributes. Yeah. So that's the theism. So in the Maturidi perspective, in the Hanafi Maturidi perspective, we differentiate between minimal theism, and those are believers in minimal theism, and the maximal theist that believes in the whole identity of God. Also that the God that punishes you, can send you to hell, or can that can also reward you with heaven. So this is important. So in theism, you have this full identity of God. The acosmological God is that that you can still have this idea of God, but then it's more interconnected, more collapsed, more sort of interconnected with the metaphysical world and the physical world. So this is also what you can call panentheism, some forms of philosophical Hinduism, the Neoplatonism, Aristotelianism, like you just said, deism.
And some forms of Christianity, I mean, process theology in
yes, exactly. Open theism.
Open theism, yeah. These are quite in that second category rather than under the Abrahamic.
They're not theisms. Because theisms is an agent God that also exists outside the frameworks of creation. That is not defined by the frameworks of creation in that sense. But in the acosmological perspective, you get that God then is not in his own, not God by himself, then God is sort of pulled within the Alam al-Ghaib.
Yeah.
The idea of that God exists in the same realm as angels. God is in heaven, literally.
Yes, and you get in Western philosophy, Hegel perhaps is the supreme example of that. God is the immanent divine within the historical process, the Geist leading.
Exactly. So God is a force. So either as a very personal God that has a body, so he becomes very much embodied. And this is so the acosmological paradigm is something that a lot of believers in Christianity, but also Muslim believers, I think a lot of them, from a psychology of religion point of view, have this acosmological paradigm in their mind. They believe God is in heaven, that angels go to God in that sense. Right. That sort of that you can walk up to him, and especially in biblical religion, this is especially the language that is used. So you can either have this supreme being that also has a very personal identity, or on the other side, he becomes completely depersonalized, and it becomes a force of transcendent nature. So when Einstein contradicted himself, he said, I believe in the God of Spinoza. But at the same time, when you read his letters, when you read some of his God talk, he's very mystical. Right. So he emphasized, I don't believe in the personal God of Judaism. So, but some elements of Judaic thought, a lot of Christian believers, a lot of Muslim believers are stuck not in pure theism, in radical theism. They're sort of in this space between. And that has to do with the limits of psychology. Right. And this is important as well for me. I'm not saying, and this is very important, I'm not saying that people do shirk. I'm not saying that that people are bad believers. It has to do with how language informs our psychology, and also how much imagination you can have. How do you imagine a God without form, without limits? that is undefined by anything we know. And that is, from a psychological perspective, very difficult. So one of the things as well in this is that a lot of people are, from a psychological perspective, are stuck between theism and acosmological thinking, because those has also to do with the limits of our psychology itself. It's very difficult to step out of our psychology and train ourselves. Allahu Akbar, Allah is still bigger than we can imagine. And this is the idea of ikhlas. Ikhlas is purifying yourself from those psychological limitations, from those psychological imaginations about God himself, these awham, these illusionary ideas about Allah. Then you have the cosmological paradigm, which is completely confined by the physical universe, where they also even believe that supernatural beings are not really beyond naturalism. They exist in the world. So you see this with animism, spirit beliefs. They don't believe that they believe that they're in the world. They walk around us. So even this, for example, you have ghost hunters and these type of shows, reality shows, that try to prove that ghosts exist in old houses and ruins, etc. And they use empirical devices for it. They try to see shifts in magnetism and electronical waves, and that ghosts can talk to radios. That's exactly cosmological beliefs. The idea that they are still part of the physical universe in that way. Some elements of Buddhism is that way. Shamanism, and that some of type of Greek, for example, Greek polytheism, they literally believed that the gods lived on Mount Olympus in that sense. Mm-hmm. So the idea that heaven and hell are physical places in the way that they understand the physical universe itself. So the cosmological perspective can still believe in the ideas of the divine, but only on physical terms. So when we talk about shirk, what we talk about shirk is that shirk, sharika, comes from, for example, means to tie something down. So shirk itself is not only partnering up, combining things, it also sort of tie things down. So if you tie your shoes, that is a form of sharika, the idea of tying your shoes. So the idea is that the divine is confined to either your psychological imagination or defined by the idea of your empirical imagination, the idea of the empirical experience. So God is either defined by the world, as in pantheism, as God walking among us, or you say that God is physically in heaven, or that he is this sort of transcendent force of the universe itself. These are all acosmological and cosmological beliefs. Imagine now Laylatul Qadr. When revelation is sent down, do we believe that Gabriel alayhi salam went to heaven, talked to God as if standing in front of him, got the Quran, and then went down? Is that a theistic approach towards revelation? Is tanzil, revelation as in sending down, are we using a theistic mode, a theistic paradigm, or is this far more an acosmological paradigm? And this is something that I notice when also teaching even my students. So I teach Muslim theologians here at the Islamic University, imams, and when I teach also these subjects to them, these paradigms, a lot of times for them it's shock therapy, like, oh, I was stuck in a type of psychological mode. I did not understand that I was more and I had a more acosmological mindset than a theistic mindset, because I did believe that sort of Gabriel alayhi salam, Jibril, went directly to God, as if in going to his office, Allah behind the desk almost type of mode, And of course, there are Muslim theologians that had this very physical, bodily, embodied, corporeal idea of God. And this, of course, was the extreme minority rejected by the overall majority, because also philosophically, it doesn't make sense. Let's move on, because let's go on with our paradigms. So you have, if you now look at, I started out with the Islamic worldview, remember? Ilahud, divine existence, the malakut, the alam as the unseen world, alam al-ghaib, and then the mulk as the physical world, the alam al-shahada. So theism is directly, so how classical scholars defined ilahut, malakut, mulk is a perfect paradigm of theism. But when it comes to the acosmological paradigm, you can see that they reduced the divine to the malakut, to the unseen world. So then God and the malakut are sort of collapsed into one another. And then when it comes to the mulk, the cosmological paradigm, you only have the empirical world. Interesting about this is that, like we just said, atheists, they reject theism. Some of them, a lot of them will also reject the acosmological paradigm, but they do, but for example, so they, in a sense, what is then an atheist itself is somebody that only believes in the cosmological paradigm, but even atheists themselves can still believe in beings in the physical world that are defined as supernatural or special beings. So you can still believe, so there's a difference between believing in ghosts or in, deceased, interacting with deceased in the mulk or in the malakut. We as Muslims believe that you can see deceased people in dreams, right? So you're not interacting with them in the mulk, in the seen world. You're interacting with them in the malakut, in the unseen world. But there are a lot of people that believe in ghosts as if they are part of the physical world, that they exist. So a lot of times you would see that they live in a different dimension. But the malakut is not a different dimension of the physical world. Yeah, so these are very important to think about. We have a very unstructured way of thinking about these things. So what I do hope is that sort of this triggers people in looking at the way they look at beliefs, look at how they look at the world. And also look at a lot of how Hollywood is sort of teaching us to see the world either from a cosmological paradigm or from a cosmological paradigm. Hollywood cannot, theism is unusable in Hollywood. So if you look at all those series and movies about the existence of angels, heaven and hell, or whatever, they all use imagery that is acosmological or cosmological. Because theism itself is very difficult to define by, in a Hollywood term. So we're also very much influenced by media, in the way that we look at the world, the way we look at Revelation, the idea of angels interacting with the world, etc., is very much defined by a lot of media. Now let's zoom into, because we're already, of course, going on for an hour, setting the stage. So now let's look at our case study, Laylatul Qadr. It is mentioned, and this is again very important, if this was not in the Quran, would you and I have known about Laylatul Qadr?
No.
Exactly. So it is samiyat. It is revealed. It is an event that is explained to us through revelation itself. So Surah Al-Qadr says, we have sent it down. Yeah, the who. Yeah, the anzalna who. So what is the who? What is the it? Now, so the Mufassirun, the commentators on the Quran, mention that the who is either the Quran, all types of revelation, and the Qadr of the year. So they give different explanations of it. What will we make perceive what the night of power is? And this is interesting. I said before in setting the stage towards this point is that we are very much handicapped, disabled by our imagination, by our psychology. And now this Quran verse says, Adrika. Adrika refers to perceiving your imagination. Mudrak is your imagination, your what we call the material intellect, the idea of how your brain processes things. So the Quran even mocks it. What will make you perceive what the night of power is? Because technically, without the Quran saying it, you did not even know that it existed. Yeah, the night of power is better, khair, than 1,000 months. So now it's interesting that this is not normal time. Yeah, so it already says something special is going on. This is not a normal temporal event. In a descent, and now you can see, anzalnahu, we have sent down in it the Quran, and then verse 4 says, tanazalahu. What is sent down? Malaikat. Angels are sent down. And al-ruh, the spirit. And the ruh here is for the majority of scholars identified with Jibril alayhi salam, with Gabriel, the angel Gabriel. But there are also different explanations of it. We don't need to go into that. You can read my article, which is freely downloaded on my academia, my research article on this, where I compare all the different type of explanations of this surah. Peace, salam, is in it until the rise of dawn. So, what do we see here? What's going on here? First of all, what is sent down? So the majority of scholars say what is sent down. In the first verse, it refers to the Quran. It refers to revelation. In verse 4, it refers to angels. And they are sent down by the leave of their Lord. Isni Rabbihi. With every command. Min kulli amr. What is the amr here? Which is your qadr. It is your destiny of the year. This is how it explains. So there are two things that are sent down with Laylatul Qadr. Something that is apart from you, the Quran, that is an event that has nothing to do with you and me in that sense. That's something that happened to our Prophet alayhi salam. But then verse 4 is about you and me. This is the yearly descent that affects us as a person. Yeah? So when we read the Quran, when you and I read the Quran now, we are reading the first verse, the descending down mentioned in the first verse. But then in verse number 4, it refers to descending down that is in relation to us, our yearly qadr. Now, like I said, we now have this sending down as a spatial event, but also that it creates a temporal event. It's in the night of power. That's a temporal designation. That is something in time. It's a night, the night of power, Laylatul Qadr, or the night of decree. And it's better than 1,000 months. So the months here are natural months. Those are the months that you and I know in our calendar, as in it better than 1,000 calendar months. But the night of power is different. And of course, Imam Razi in his tafsir and also others emphasize as well, what is 1,000 months? So how much year is that, you think? How much is 1,000 months?
I haven't calculated it. Have you?
It's 83 years when you take the moon months. So you take the moon year as so about 83 years. So Razi says, so the night of power is better than a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on. Let's see the implications of this. And let's focus on revelation. So on the first verse, what does it mean to send down? So before its oral manifestation on the tongue of our Prophet, alayhi salam, revelation had already gone through a whole process. So things happened before it was recited by the Prophet, alayhi salam. Yeah. First of all, you have divine existence, the ilahut, God by himself. He instigated the act of creation. So he created the unseen and the seen world. He created the alam al-ghayb and the alam al-shahada. He created the malakut and the mulk. Yeah? Revelation is part of this creative act. And this is important. Because a lot of people misunderstand. They think that revelation is sort of that Jibril goes up to God as if Allah is in this penthouse. Yeah, he's in the upper office. He goes there, gets revelation, and then comes down, and then gives it to our Prophet, alayhi salam. This is not how it works. All the traditions explain it very differently to us. It is said that the Quran is written on the Allahu ala Mahfuz, the well-preserved tablet. The well-preserved tablet is part of the malakut of the alam al-ghayb. So the Quran is written on the Law Mahfuz. So it's in that way, revelation, the manifestation of revelation, is itself already part of creation. Yeah. Together also, what is also on the Law Mahfuz? Your qadr, my qadr, the qadr of everything. Yeah. So the way, the complete description of every real possible thing, what we call the kulli wasf, the description of everything. So these are, for example, hadith and statements by different traditions. So these are afar. Some of them go back to the Sahaba. So on Laylatul Qadr, God brought it down, the Qur'an, to the lowest heaven, as-sama' dunya, in its totality, jumla, yeah, after which he revealed it in parts over a period of 20 to 25 years. And then Suyuti adds to it, the differences are due to the differences of opinion on how long the Prophet remained in Mecca after his calling. So this is what we call the issue of the Fatra period, the idea of, how the between the first revelations and then sort of in the early Meccan period, was there like 1 month, 1 week, 3 months, or 3 years between the first revelations or not? Though there's a difference of opinion in the timeline of revelation. The Quran was separated from the dhikr. Yeah, so the dhikr is the term that is used for all the revelation that's on the Lawh Mahfuz. So the Muslim theologians would emphasize that Jibril alayhi salam, is the angel of revelation. So when he revealed to Musa alayhi salam, he would go to the Lawh Mahfuz. He would take from the zikr what was needed based on haja, based on need of the receiving prophet, the receiving messenger, and his people. And he would take from the zikr as a sort of collective source of revelation. He would take from the zikr and then give it to Musa. And when it was given to Musa, it comes in the tongue of the receiving messenger. So the zikr that is expressed in Hebrew is what we call the Torah. The zikr that is expressed in Aramaic is what we call the Injil. And the zikr that we express in Arabic is called the Qur'an. This is how they viewed it. Yeah. So the Qur'an was taken from the zikr, from the Lawh Mahfuz, from the well-preserved tablet, and was placed in the Bayt al-Izza. And it's interesting how scholars discuss this. They would say, oh, that's because the abode of glory, the Bayt al-Izza, is placed in the metaphysical realm, in the Alam al-Ghaib, in the unseen world, in the Malakut, and is somewhere around Mars, the planet Mars, or on, some say no, it's around the same sphere, around the same level as the moon. Yeah? And that's the lowest heaven. And then Jibril alayhi salam would reveal it to our prophet. So then we have this switch from the unseen world towards the seen world. So first, there are 2 types of sending down. First from the Lawh Mahfuz in the highest heaven to the lowest heavens. So that's the first tenzu. That is within the unseen world, within the Alam al-Ghaib, within the Malakut. So from the highest heavens to the lowest heavens, the Quran is sent down. That is, and said that this is in one go, in completely, jumla. The Quran is completely sent down. And then the Quran is sent down in short pieces over a period of 20, 25 years to our Prophet alayhi salam. That is, so then it comes from the unseen world towards the seen world. Then it becomes manifested as revelation. Yeah. So with this transfer from the first to second tanzil, the Quran was brought from the unseen world to the seen world, where it manifests itself as sounds and letters. Because then it becomes physical vibrations, sounds, and forms, letters. Yeah? So you get sort of this image where you have God, which is in the Ilahut. Yeah, God is God by himself is not connected, doesn't overlap or sort of in any way has the same type of dimensions, identities as creation. Yeah. So you have, what we see now is what happens here is this movement from the highest heaven to the lowest heavens creates this idea of sacred space. So you have movement in the unseen world, and then from the unseen world to the seen world, from the Malakut to the Mulk. It creates sacred space. But then also, the Quran is revealed over a period of 20 plus years. That is sacred time. So Laylatul Qadr, until the death of our Prophet ﷺ, you get this idea of sacred time as well. So space and time, you get this space-time continuum that is also present when it comes to revelation. Now, let's look about cosmology. So, for example, in the pre-Islamic, even pre-Christian, pre-Judaic worldview, they believe that you have the Earth as a sort of disk, and you have then an ocean around it and some islands. But in a sense, they had this worldview that was had almost no type of transcendence into it. So there was technically no malakut. So, for example, the Babylonian worldview, the Babylonian cosmos, was pure muluk. So also their divinities, their gods, their spirits in the Babylonian worldview and the Babylonian religion was completely defined by the muluk, by the idea of it all existed within the physical universe. Even special beings, special gods as beings all existed as physical gods that walk the earth. Yeah. The biblical worldview is interesting is because the Bible is a very complex text, right? It has multiple books in it. So what part of the Bible do you use to create a cosmology? So there are parts of it that are very cosmological, very, that sort of whereby only the physical world exists. There are parts of the Bible that are more acosmological, where you have this supernatural world, of course, the idea of angels. But then, of course, there are parts of the Bible that are highly theistic, where God exists on his own apart from creation. So the problem with the Bible is it has different paradigms within its own text. So if you try to create a sort of worldview out of it, the biblical cosmos, as these scholars try to do, you get sort of this very weird type of cosmos. I don't agree with this. I believe that the Bible itself contains like three different type of paradigms in it. So you cannot really use the Bible to create the idea of a biblical cosmos because, for example, most Christians would emphasize a theistic paradigm. They would interpret the Bible from a theistic paradigm. So, for example, Augustine would mention that Genesis, the book of Genesis, which talks about creation, is metaphorical, it's not literal. Why? Because Augustine, the Christian theologian from the 4th century, he is a theist. He has a theistic mindset. He has a theistic paradigm in his mind. So he reads the Bible from a theistic perspective. So everything that goes against theism, he says is metaphorical. Part of it, by the way, we do as well as Muslims. For example, God, in the Quran, it talks about that God has hands, that he created us biyadin, with his 2 hands. From a theistic perspective, hands are not hands, of course. So this is that whole discussion about, are the eyes of God real? His wajh, his face, is it face or presence? Depends on, do you read the Quran from a cosmological perspective, paradigm, or from a theistic paradigm? So also these same scholars try to create a Quranic cosmos. I completely disagree with it. Why? Because they misunderstand that it depends on from which paradigm do you read the Quran. You can read the Quran from a muluk, from a physical perspective. This is also one of the interesting things, if you look at it, people that, for example, non-Muslims, and especially atheists that read the Quran, they read the Quran from this very physical universe perspective. And they would look at, the Quran, then if you look from this sort of, if you only understand the Quran from a physical universe perspective, this is the picture you're going to get.
Yeah, because I often find when people refer to the Quran's language of the seven heavens, for example, they'll take that in a very materialist, cosmological way.
Exactly, but it's not a Big Bang. It doesn't exist in Big Bang cosmology. The 7 heavens is not about the physical heavens. It's about the metaphysical heavens, the malakut, the alam al-ghaib. Yeah, we exist in a physical universe. So I disagree with this Quranic cosmos, but still. And this is also one of the things as well. The Quran has been dominantly read from a theistic lens. So that says something that Islam, the Quran and Sunnah, created theistic mindset on purpose. So any non-theistic reading of the Quran simply doesn't make sense. It goes against the majority perspective. We have to. This is again also the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah perspective. Go with the majority. The majority are theistic. Okay, let's go on. So the thing is, of course, that what were the cosmologies in Islamic thought? Now, when it comes to the physical universe, the mulk, the alama shahada, the empirical universe, Muslims early on took on the Greek cosmology. So they took on this idea of the spheres where you have, and it's geocentric. So you have the Earth in the middle, and then you have the different planets and the sun around it, going around it. And the Greek universe only existed our solar system. So you had the solar system, and the outer layer of the solar system were the star systems. Yeah. So the star signs, the astrological systems, the star signs were seen as not as different galaxies, different solar systems. They were seen as sort of this outer sphere, this outer layer. So the Greek cosmology was very small, by the way. It was a very confined idea within it, because it did not have this real idea of transcendence. So this cosmology, when this Greek cosmology was entered into Islam, it was very quickly adapted towards theism. So it quickly went from this sort of very confined cosmology, physical cosmology, into this more complicated and larger type of cosmology, where you have void, where you have this idea of a larger universe, where Muslim theologians, philosophers would discuss that stars are suns, and it was also discussed by other religions and other philosophers outside of Islam. Again, that was not unique to Islam, but because of theism, and this is the point, because of the theistic paradigm, they fought bigger. Because if you have an absolute unlimited God, then the universe itself, why should it be small? Because
I think in Surah Al-Fatiha, which Muslims pray 17 times a day, the idea of God as Lord of the worlds, this idea of worlds, which is not terrestrial worlds. These are the worlds of the spiritual, the supernatural, the metaphysical, as well as this world. And so it's built in the very first chapter of the Quran, this sense of the enormity of the metaphysical and the physical worlds.
Exactly.
And that's obviously Muslims are very much focused on that conception, because it's what we pray 17 times a day, so we can't forget it.
Yeah, and it's even, for example, Imam Razi in his tafsir, and I here have our brother Said's
guest on Bong Theology a few weeks ago.
Yeah. So our dear brother, of course, he beautifully translated the part of Razi. I have him up there. And one of the things exactly on Alamin that you just mentioned, he emphasized. So he emphasized that that this means, I'm trying to. I had it marked somewhere. Where do I have it marked?
A huge volume, isn't it? It's just about one verse. Repeated verses in.
But it's about that Alamin, that he says that Alamin means, he says, that you can have alif, millions and millions of awalim, of worlds, where you have suns and planets and earths and atoms on it. So even, and he's talking about the physical universe, not only the metaphysical universe. He's not talking about the malakut. Alamin is about the alam al-ghaib and the alam al-shahada, and there are worlds within the alam al-ghaib and the alam al-shahada. There are dimensions, universes within those. And so Razi and other Muslim theologians as well, because of their theistic mindset, looked at the stars and are like, those are suns as well. Those are solar systems. So theism, that's one of the beauties of it. When I started to research this whole discussion between the Muslim philosophers and Muslim theologians, a lot of times the misconception is that Muslim philosophers were the free thinkers and the theologians were the dogmatics. It was not. It was the other way around. One thing that the Mutakalimun would emphasize is that the Muslim philosophers were stuck in doing taqlid. They're doing imitation of the Greek thinkers. And the Muslim theologians would laugh at it. They would say, your universe is too small. So there are thousands of worlds out there. All those stars are galaxies themselves. it was Muslim theologians that were saying that, because for them, they would emphasize that God's creativity, God's creative act is not confined by this very philosophical naturalism, this idea that because in Greek, in the Aristotelian worldview, God is the prime mover. He doesn't have an identity. There's no creativity in the God of Aristotle. Mm-hmm. So the Muslim philosophers saw God as this very natural force of creation. But so there's no creativity in it. It's sort of this, what they called fayet, this natural outflowing of divine transcendence into the physical world. There's no creativity involved in that. But Muslim theologians were like, no, God has an identity, has a personality, and he's creative. So God creates what he wants, and God creates beauty. So there's beauty everywhere, there's creativity everywhere. Muslim theologians, the Mutakallimun, were the free thinkers, not the Muslim philosophers, not on these aspects. But of course, the Muslim philosophers were the natural scientists of their time. So we started to use the Avicennian worldview early, Avicenna and other Muslim philosophers greatly updated the Greek cosmology. But of course, it was still defined by geocentrism, this idea of that the Earth is in the center of the galaxy, of the solar system, and the sun is the third rock around us. But there were Muslim thinkers that sort of had ideas of what if the sun was in the middle. And even Imam Razi, again, in his work on theology, he says it. He says, isn't it strange that the sun, which is the sultan of the aflak, is the sultan of the bodily heavens. He's the greatest bodily heaven. Why is the sun not in the middle? So he, again, from the pre-modern philosophical mindset, they believed in this very idea of natural systems, and then for them the galaxy, the solar system, should be geocentric because everything has to have. That's the way it is. But Muslim theologians, as free thinkers, were like, "Why is the sun not in the middle? Why not? It could be." So they were the ones that sort of. Because based on the idea of divine creativity, they were like, hey, things could be very different than what we think it is. So a lot of this sort of theistic creativity, creative thinking, also seeped into natural philosophy, into astronomy. And then, of course, then we have Copernicus in Europe that sort of picks it up and starts to show that in calculations, it would make sense. It does make sense on paper in mathematics. And then you have Galileo, of course, that proves it with physical evidence, with the telescope, because that's the thing that Copernicus lacked. Copernicus only had the calculations that made sense, but he did not have the empirical proof that it is reality, and that is something that Galileo gave. So we went from geocentrism to heliocentrism, but there are also some what we call Islamic heliocentrism, like Ibn Shatir's lunar model, where he looks at no, the sun could be in the middle if you use these type of calculations. So there are predecessors to Copernicus. And of course, for centuries, so when we moved in the 15th century from geocentrism towards heliocentrism, where the sun is the middle of the solar system, and then that developed into the Newtonian cosmology that like we know it, where everything is very mathematically based. The idea of gravity, that you can calculate gravity, is something that Newton was the main instigator in. So now the universe becomes this large mathematical machine, the clockwork. This is also very much intertwined with this idea of time. You get this idea of the universe as a clock. Now, of course, we shifted in the last 150 years into Big Bang cosmology, in quantum cosmology, where suddenly we don't have a clockwork universe per se in everything, but we also have sort of this idea of semi-chaos. And even that, of course, is now, we don't believe that quantum physics itself is chaotic. It's still grounded in laws and in structures, but on such a fine level, subtle level, that's very hard to define. But these, again, are all cosmologies within the muluk, and this is important. So even though we went from geocentrism to heliocentrism and Newtonian universe, we now have entered into the Big Bang cosmology, into an Einstein universe. This is all about the muluk, all about the alam al-shahada. It has nothing to do with the alam al-ghaib, with the unseen world. And this is what a lot of people misunderstand. And it's all this progress in scientific thinking, all this progress in astronomical thinking and astrophysics, it doesn't deny or criticize in any way the Islamic worldview of muluk, seen world, unseen world, the malakut and the lahut. Because the lahut and the malakut are not dependent on changes in the muluk. So that we went from geocentrism, where the earth is the center of our existence, to that the sun becomes the center of our physical existence, doesn't in any way change the idea of malakut and lahut. Because in the theistic worldview, doesn't do anything to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is important as well. When we talk about revelation, even from going to geocentrism to Big Bang cosmology, it doesn't change anything, because that the Quran was revealed from the highest heaven to the lowest heaven has nothing to do with Big Bang cosmology, has nothing to do with geocentrism or heliocentrism. And this is very important.
I think you make an excellent point. I think the only thing I would kind of add to that is, and this is a slightly different take, is that scientists in the West will often say, well, our approach, our methodology is based on methodological naturalism. We're not making any claims about metaphysics, the transcendent, or God. But in practice, what very often happens with many scientists is that a kind of metaphysical naturalism is not only just an empirical way of doing things, it actually becomes the worldview itself, and the transcendent is excluded, if not explicitly. I mean, Richard Dawkins would explicitly exclude it, but the constant emphasis on the naturalistic worldview as the only worldview that's ever considered becomes a kind of metaphysical naturalism by default. It kind of becomes it.
And even if you incorporate like a philosophical God, an Aristotelian God, or the God of Spinoza, like Einstein would say, and even Michio Kaku would constantly emphasize, oh, I believe in the God of Einstein and Spinoza, is what they mean is simply a prime mover, the idea of order. So God is not the God of Christianity or Islam or any type of personal God. It's not even Zeus. It is simply God as a sort of law book. It has no identity. Mm-hmm. So, and this is partially has to do, of course, with what happened, of course, with the Kantian, the influence of Immanuel Kant in the Enlightenment is with the increase of empirical knowledge about the universe, because of technology, we now know so much from the seen world, the alam al-shahada, the muluk. We know so much of it that the idea of evidence, the idea of proof itself now has become so different. So evidence in the natural sciences, like you just said, with naturalism, methodological naturalism, the idea of proof is not the same as proof in relation to metaphysics, the idea of talking about metaphysical existence. So angels, from a philosophical perspective, are possible, but from a naturalistic, empirical perspective, they don't exist. Why? You cannot measure them. You cannot prove them. Mm-hmm. So even people that, and this is something we discuss, of course, in philosophy of religion, can you trust religious experiences? Because people have seen angels. We have all over, and that's the thing even. I teach comparative religion. In the history of religion, angels are sort of the main thing in all those traditions. They have different descriptions, a bit of them, but they're sort of a mainline, a baseline angel in all the traditions, and they're all messengers. They all bring something. They all are the in-betweens, yeah, and they are always pure. They're always so in a lot of ways, angels have sort of this sort of a baseline description you can see everywhere. Mm-hmm. Is this that not proof then? Is this not empirical proof? And the thing is, of course, with empirical proof is that you and I can measure it, can test it, and we're not dependent on historical statements. So that's the whole point, is that scientists, and this is part of a lot of research shows this as well, is that they are so trained. I did biochemistry. You are so trained in only seeing the world through an empirical lens that anything outside of the empirical lens, outside observation, simply is not taking as something that truly exists, because it's not simply that science denies it, and that science. So like, why are most scientists atheists or agnostic? It's because they have been formed by that. Their psychology is formed by that through their training, through their education. So the science education itself is secularizes. That's one of the main things that we see. And again, that has to do with, like I said, those metaphysical paradigms: theism, a cosmological paradigm, and cosmological paradigm. Science education makes you only see the mulk, makes you only see the alam shahada, and everything else. And people also are not trained in philosophy. So when I discuss with people, with non-religious people or non-theologians, with non-philosophers, when I discuss about the idea that that God is a very is a logical possibility in philosophy, that supernatural, that there are types of dimensions, transcendent dimensions apart from our physical dimensions, though those and I don't talk about quantum dimensions or the multiverse and all that type of stuff, because there are still multiverse ideas are still within the physical universe. But the idea of metaphysical universe, that those are philosophically logical and you can rationalize them. They've never been trained in that. Why? Also because the burden of proof is so different. A philosophical statement, for it to be true, is very different from an astronomical or physical or biological statement to be true. So and these are a lot of discussions in philosophy of science, in the philosophy of logic, but now we can see also in philosophy of religion, etc., and the whole discussion about science and religion. What I do see is that people start to respect it a bit more. These different approaches towards it. So anyway, let's move on, because like I said, our case study mainly had to do not with science and religion, but sort of what are the mindsets of Muslims. And by the way, to emphasize this is a good point, by the way. A lot of Muslims are in the STEM. So especially Muslims in the West, they go into STEM. So they go into, physical, in the physical sciences, into the exact sciences. But the problem is their psychology is formed by the education they're getting. So for a lot of Muslims that are trained as a physicist, or even as a psychologist, by the way, a lot of them are trained to only experience the physical world, the empirical world. What does that do to them as believers? They're stuck so much in the cosmological paradigm. How difficult will it be for them to sort of hold on?
You raise a valid point, but I think in practice, it's only my subjective, limited experience. But the STEM people that you refer to, and a lot of most Muslims seem to be studying these areas. If they're practicing Muslims, and the ones I've met tend to be, they pray, for example, and they read the Qur'an, don't seem to have a problem in terms of their own personal epistemological outlook. That they understand these kind of the metaphysical realm and so on. There may be a practical problem in terms of how their research is expressed and ignoring the transcendent. But I don't get the sense of interior conflictual or separation within themselves. I get the sense that they do get it. They have this hierarchy, ontological hierarchy. This is my own experience, but
and especially, and this is again important for us as parents, especially when they are brought up into it, because then they can take the imagination, the theistic mindset that they were given when they were children. That sort of becomes this resilient factor, this resilience against the secularization of their mindset.
I get this is the remarkable thing about Muslims in the West that I meet, that they are I think one can generalize. I don't think they are very robust in their faith. I know people do lose their faith, but a lot of new people come in as well. But compared to other faith groups, be they Christian or Jewish and so on, but Muslims are quite distinctive in the robust integrity of their faith. I don't sense a widespread secularization going on. That's controversial because you might disagree with that. But the Muslims I meet, whether it be in Britain or elsewhere, are all pretty much very solid believers, in my experience.
No, I agree with that. And of course, we could say, oh, 50 years from now, maybe they are secularized. We just are only in the first wave. You could, there are people saying that.
No, but
of course, you have increase of atheism and secularism in Turkey and in Iran, etc. You have now also this research on atheism, is increasing in the Arab world, etc. Mm-hmm. Part of it, I believe, has to do with STEM, the idea of because of that the education, the exact sciences secularizes their mindset, so it becomes very difficult for them to latch onto it. Part of it has to do with Occidentalism, the idea of to be rational, to be a civilized person, you have to mimic the West and mimic Western identities, and then sort of you're agnostic or atheist or deistic. You see there's a lot of Islamic deism. So even though, so the idea, a lot of Muslims are deists. So even though it's to become a full atheist is a bit too much for them, but sort of to make God more rational and logical, sort of they make him more deistic than theistic. And this is important as well, is that you have to look at Islam itself. So you were saying, oh, a lot of Muslims are doing it, but how is Islam involved in this? And that's something I'm intrigued by. Is, again, what is the worldview that Islam generates? The robustness of it. There's a resilience in it. And part of it, I believe, has also a lot to do with, like you said, praying, with the ritual aspect of it. And that's something we can go into now because, like I said, the theoretical Islam gives off the Islamic worldview. So Islam in theory, Islam on paper, Islam in the books of theology, in the books of philosophy, that Islam is a very robust and rational and philosophically defendable worldview. Yeah. But now we go into the practice, and the practice is something we do, the activity we do. Like you said, praying. Praying is something you do. And also, for example, Muslim theologians emphasize that being thankful for your existence is rational, but praying 5 times a day is not. That is part of the Samiyat, that is revealed. You and I would not know that we have to circumambulate the Kaaba 7 times, the Tawaf 7 times, if the Sunnah would not tell us. We would not know that we had to pray 5 times, if the Quran and Sunnah would not tell us. And this is the whole point again, is that doing rituals as an expression of gratitude towards the Creator, that's rational. Yeah, that is something that also you can even non-Muslim philosophers like Plotinus, for example. So that's a 3rd century Greek Alexandrian philosopher. Plotinus fasted. He prayed. He wasn't Christian. He was not a follower of any type of religion. He said, I pray and I fast because from my philosophy, that is what I need to do. So the idea of rituals themselves are philosophically, rationally logical to do. But to do it 5 times, to do, the exact details of the Islamic rituals themselves, those need to be revealed.
And I think also, absolutely. I think for those Muslims who are involved in STEM research or STEM work, as you say, who are practicing Muslim, who do pray 5 times a day, this builds up this very act of praying, submission and connection with God, builds up, I think, a kind of immunity, I would argue, against a kind of toxic secularism, which is part of because one is constantly coming back to, and prayer is real. It's not a fictional exercise. It's an actual connection with God. So
it's embodied. It's psychological. It's embodied.
It's existential, etc. So it is actually a regenerative immune system, spiritual immune system that keeps one alive to God, and I say immune to some extent from these threats, even when one is practicing these sciences or technologies, which in the way they're configured in the West anyway are completely devoid of any transcendent reference. So I think that is part of the success of Muslims, why we survive in this hostile environment.
And also,
again, a test. It's also, I mean, not forgetting, this life is a test, so it's meant to be challenging, and so particularly in the West, if one doesn't rise to the challenge, one will simply sink, one will go down, and one would disappear. One can't just be carried like one used to be, perhaps in the classical Muslim world, carried through life, but by one's environment, one's family, one's mosque, everything. In the West, you either you step up to the plate or you go under, and so that also that dynamic creates a sense of fortitude in the face of the secular.
Yeah, and therefore also, and imagine also, you don't pray simply one time a day, but 5 times a day. So it seems there's also, and apart from the fact, and this is something we need to be careful about, it's always discussed by Muslim theologians, is we can rationalize the benefits of prayer, but we cannot fully rationalize it that this was also the objective of that. So we can say that 5 times a day creates more resilience, immunity, like you said, against secularization, than praying 1 time a day. So we can see this sort of benefit of the 5 times a day in that. Yeah. And again, also the importance of being practicing and also raising practicing Muslims, that our children don't need to sort of learn how to pray when they're 20 plus, because then it's too late, because then sort of secularism can kick in more than we want to. Because the thing is, what we mean by secularization is that they are stuck in the muluk. They are stuck in the cosmological paradigm when they look at the world. So they can still believe in God, but then because of the sort of the cosmological paradigm creates this very small psychology of religion. So theism doesn't fit in their mindset anymore. And so when you pray prayer only makes sense with, technically, especially how we pray, only makes sense with theism. And this is interesting as well. If you look at, for example, the discussion among the early theologians, for example, with the Mu'tazila went too far in their definition of theism, in that they did what we call ta'alil, the idea of emptying God. They would empty God of identity. So they would say that all the attributes, all the sifat Allah are identical with one another, technically, or identical with his essence. So God, that we say God, that Allah is al-alim, that he's the knowing, simply means that the Dhat Allah, the essence of Allah, simply can know things. That's it. So it's not an attribute by itself. It's not an identity. Yeah. So in a sense, they would make what we call divine simplicity. They would make God only, in a sense, empty, void of any type of identity, even linguistic identity. So even attributes where we designate it by names. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that, and there's a very famous statement by, and I think it was Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, so the famous Sunni theologian. I think it was him, and otherwise somebody else, but it's a very famous statement that I cannot pray to your God. So that Muslim Sunni theologian, the theistic theologian, would say to the Mu'tazila, I cannot pray to your God. Your God has no identity. So prayer itself, what does prayer do? Would you pray to the Aristotelian God? Mm-hmm. Would that make sense? Would you pray to the Aristotelian God that is simply a force of nature? That's simply the thing that keeps everything going? No. You pray, you show, how do you, thankfulness. To thank you means that I know that you receive my thanks. Mm-hmm. And also, thankfulness is 2 ways. Imagine that I walk outside and the wind pulls down an apple and falls on my lap. Do I say, thank you, wind? Because I don't think that the wind has an identity. It has no, so it wasn't on purpose. Mm-hmm. But in a theistic worldview, we believe that everything has a purpose, and we give thanks to it. Alhamdulillah. We praise God. We show what we call the shukr al-mun'im. We show thankfulness to the benefactor. God who benefits us. So we thank him because we believe that the things that happen to us are on purpose. So it means that God has an identity. And also, so if I say thank you, it means that he can receive the thanks. So the personality goes two ways. So praying 5 times a day emphasizes theism, that God has an agency, that God has a personality. You're not praying to the Aristotelian God or the God of Spinoza.
Guide us to the straight path. So the constant request, guide us to the straight path, expecting thereby to be guided rather than just an anonymous force. And also the twice we say God is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most merciful, the most compassionate. So he has attributes of love and care and nurturing and sustaining and so on. And this is these are personal attributes of
exactly.
God.
So this is different from what you see now with a lot of new age and postmodern meditation. Is sort of, oh, I connect with the universe. What they mean by that is they want to connect with this idea of order, but it is emptyless. It is empty order. It is without identity. It is void of identity. And they, of course, a lot of mindfulness, etc. They got this from Zen Buddhism and from certain types of Hinduism, where again also where transcendence or any type of higher order is emptied of any identity. Our prayer, if you look at the way Muslims pray, we pray to something that can say yes or no to us. It has an identity. So our prayer teaches us theism. So although we can have, I could be in a lab an hour ago, and then I'm in this cosmological mode, empirical mode, but then I have to pray, and then the prayer directly pushes me into theism. And this, of course, also, you see also this discussion by Muslim theologians about, look at ihsan, pray to God as if you see him, and if not, at least that he sees you. This emphasizes theism. The idea of wara, the idea of God's, taqwa, and all these concepts of God consciousness, all make no sense with deism, with the idea of God without an identity. It all only makes sense with theism. So let's move on, because again, here, it's also, if we go back, the cosmology itself, all these cosmologies from geocentrism to heliocentrism to Big Bang cosmology, all exist within the mulk, within the Alam al-Shahada. And if you only believe in the physical universe, then you have a cosmological paradigm. If you believe in the physical universe, but also that there's things that transcend it, then you believe in a cosmological paradigm. If you believe that those two, the Alam al-Shahada and the Alam al-Ghaib, the unseen and the seen world, are created by God, then you believe in theism. So now we go into time. These are the last sheets. So classical concepts of time were related to movement. Like I just said before, movement is related. Movement creates time because to move means it has to endure something. There's duration of something. Change is space is time. So time was explained as haraka, the idea of movement. Sending down a revelation is movement from the metaphysical universe to the physical universe. What is move? This is how we began our discussion. Is something special, something sacred, revelation. So the movement from malakut to mulk is that sacred space. But the movement also creates time, but special time. It is related to revelation. This is what we call sacred time. It is different from secular time, from natural time. So our prayer times, even when we begin fasting and stop fasting, you and I will look at our clock, right, or on our phone. We're looking at our prayer apps. So that is, So we look at secular, natural designations because why? The Quran says that the sun and the moon were assigned as timekeepers for us, right? There are multiple verses, multiple ayat that emphasize this. So we use the mulk, timekeeping, natural timekeeping in the mulk, in the physical world, in the Alam al-Shahada, to know our special moments when we need to create sacred time. And this is important. What then creates sacred time? Special time. And this is something that Abu Mansur al-Maturidi emphasized in other theologians. It is dependent on human activity. What we do makes it special. So when we pray, that becomes special times. These are special, what we call awqat, special timings in the day. And this is also interesting when we look at the idea of in what way does time, and this is discussed by Muslim theologians and philosophers, there are a lot of discussions about this. In what way does time overlap the unseen world and seen world? Because there are different realms. You have the alam al-shahada and alam al-ghaib. But is time overarching to them? No, it's not. They have different, what we call temporal cultures or temporal modes.
Mm.
Remember that you began this discussion about 70,000 years, remember? It's 70,000 years. Same thing. Look at angels. Do they move according to the speed of the physical universe? Is their movement the movement of the physical universe? No. Mm-hmm. So the time that angels also exist in a different time. Look at the story of Suleiman with the throne. The idea of instantness. Is that natural time, physical time, the alam al-shahada time, or is it the alam al-ghaib time? Because a jinn did that, an ifrit did that. The ifrit, the jinn, exists in a different realm. It has different dimensions, different time dimensions. Yeah? Now go to us. You and I exist in the alam al-shahada. Yeah? Our soul exists in alam al-ghaib, but we experience, when we are awake, we experience the alam al-shahada, the physical world. Why? This is something Ghazali emphasizes in the Ihya Ulum al-Din, in the Revival of the Religious Sciences. He emphasized God wanted us to experience existence first through the body. He says there's a reason behind that. Because the body he first wanted us to experience existence in a very limited way. Therefore, we experience in the way that we do, through our body. So our soul experiences existence through our hawas, through our sight, our hearing, etc., through our senses. Yeah? What is then a sacred time? How do we create time that is different from clock time, secular time, chronological time? Yeah. So first of all, we already experience different forms of time. Yeah, we are in what we call different temporal cultures. So we have large perspective of this. So for example, in intercultural studies, we would talk about, in anthropology, we talk about monochronic versus polychronic cultures. So monochronic only believe in linear time in a very limited, in a very specific timeline, which is defined by time outside of us. So it's very mechanical time. Yeah. So these are like Western cultures, you can be late. Yeah, you're not on time. Why? Because time is something outside of us, and we are measured by time that exists apart from us. In polychronic cultures, time is defined by interaction between people. Yeah. So social cultures. Yeah. And those are not, especially that's not Northern Europe in that sense. Or at least British people are polychronic in the pub, but not outside of it. Yeah?
Allegedly, yeah.
Yeah. So the idea is that polychronic cultures sort of, they emphasize social interaction. So they don't care about beginning on time. There's no being on time or being late or being early. It's about when you are there with one another, what is the interaction going on? Yeah. So this is also very much intertwined with this difference between what we call quantitative time and qualitative time. You know, we all had experiences where we forgot time because we had fun, right? That is because then time shifted from quantitative, measured time, yes, or what we also call clock time or scientific time, measured time, it shifted towards qualitative time, time that we simply experience without measuring it. Because our measurement is different now. We measure it through emotions, not to empirical statements. Yeah. So this is different between clock or scientific time versus psychological time, or absolute time versus relative time. We also make a difference between past, present, and future oriented cultures. Linear time versus cyclical time. For example, Hinduism and Buddhism apply cyclical time because they believe that, of course, you have the wheel of Dharma that everything in existence is stuck within cyclical time, while Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are mainly linear. But I'm emphasizing this, mainly linear. And this again has to do also because Islam, also Christianity, but especially Islam, we mix linear and cyclical time. And this again has to do with Laylatul Qadr, with Ramadan. So I had to draw this before we started. So the arrow is nice, but sort of the squibble is done by hand quickly on the PowerPoint. So it's not that nice and nice going. But so when it comes to creation, we believe that, of course, it has a beginning and it has an end, right? Until the Day of Judgment. That is the linear aspect of time. So that is the absolute time of creation. So creation has linear time in the way that we define creation itself. But within creation, so within the creation, we have cyclical time. We have it every year. Yeah, Laylatul Qadr comes back every year. Ramadan comes back every year. The moon comes back every month. The sun has a solar year. So we combine linear time and cyclical time. Yeah? Laylatul Qadr is part of cyclical time, not of linear time. So that is also an interesting fact about it. So now, if we come to the end, so natural or secular space and time, first of all, it doesn't need humans to be signified as natural. Humans simply exist in it. So the muluk doesn't. The muluk can exist without us. We are, you know, technically there was a point we did not exist on Earth. You know, we were put on Earth. So the muluk, the seen world, is not defined by humans. So we simply exist in it. This is what we call this is also where our experience of space and time is what we call philosophical anthropology. Sacred space and time, on the other hand, is human dependent. Like Maturidi says, the human acts signify the sacred. So we create through our rituals, by reading the Qur'an, by praying, all these acts that has to do with rituals, we create the sacred. They are therefore an expression of theological anthropology. Without revelation, we would not know what sacred time would be, how to create it. Yeah? Like I said, movement creates time. So imagine when you and I pray. So when you and I pray, we create movement. That movement, the time we apply to do the movement of the prayer, that is sacred time. The time that you and I are fasting, that's a bodily act. Yeah? That creates sacred time. Why is a mosque more special than a home? Maturidi says, because of the acts in it. People also pray at home, but you don't have Jummah at home. Jummah is something you have at the mosque. Yeah. So the mosque is special because of what humans do in it. Yeah. Something is fadila. Something is more special because of the way we do it. Yeah. This is again what we discussed before. This is also the importance of prayer and fasting, of our rituals. Without those, we would not experience sacred time. We would be stuck in secular time. Yeah. And also we are so confined. I remember when I first became Muslim in those first years, I would talk with an elderly Arab and I would say, and of course, Middle Eastern cultures are polychronic. Yeah. We Northern Europeans are monochronic. Yeah. So when I say, hey, I'm going to meet you at 5, you show up at 5. You and I, yeah. So I tried to. So I had this meeting with this elderly Arab, and I was like, oh, when do we meet? And he was Ba'ada Asr, after the Asr prayer, and I was like, after Asr prayer, you know. So it became this. So I showed up at his house after Asr prayer, like right on time. I prayed Asr and I showed up. He wasn't there because after it, you know, after it could be anything after 20 minutes later, hour later, after it, malish, you know, we'll be okay. So that's the whole thing, is that, you and I, especially then, I had this very monochronic, clock time experience of existence. When becoming Muslim made me, and also interacting with Muslims, so also with other cultures. So first, that's one of the nice things about being a convert, you know this well, it's hard. It's not always easy. You're very lonely in certain ways. The family that becomes Muslim is the family you create. My kids are Muslims, but my siblings, my parents are not. May Allah guide them. But the thing is that as a convert, you're very lonely. You lose a lot of friends at conversion because your worldviews don't align anymore, your behavior, etc. But one of the other good things, the benefits of conversion, apart, of course, from the discussion about salvation, is you also interact with cultures that are so completely different from your own. So you interact with polychondric cultures, people that experience time very differently. I remember walking with a friend of mine from Chad, and he would, and we were late, and he would meet his uncle, and we were stuck for an hour with his uncle. And so after, when we finally could leave his uncle behind, I became mad at him, like, now we're extra late. And he's like, okay, man, it's impossible for me to, say to my uncle that I cannot talk to him because we're late, because time only exists to meet each other. And I was like, I never thought of it that way. So our different temporal cultures, our different temporal modes have very different psychologies. And converting to Islam creates this, exposes you to different modes of time, psychologies of time, but also the rituals. Suddenly I had to plan my day into 5 times. So even that, if I go to a movie, I need to think about, can I pray in the movie theater or not? So with my 2 young sons, I plan my day around the 5 times. When I teach at Leiden University, I check if my classes, because then I have 3-hour classes during the winter, when, for example, Dor and Asr are very close to one another. I need to make sure that I can pray, that I sort of can cut my class. I cut my class. The break is when I need to pray. Then my students know this. So you completely create a different temporal mode, a different culture that in your existence. So also with Laylatul Qadr, Ramadan, what is the function of sacred time? Sacred time breaks you out of the secular mode of existence. It breaks you out of this very, empirical mode of existence. Yeah. So can we still understand it? Now, like you said, like we discussed, yes, we can understand it. And I hope that also this lecture, this talk helps people to become more aware of it, how cosmology and time experience are involved in this, but also the importance of rituals, fasting, prayer, but also these special moments like Laylatul Qadr that are qualitative experiences of time, not quantitative experience of time. So when people focus on, is it the 27th or not? That is a quantitative approach towards Ramadan. So a lot of people I see that they freak out, like, is it tonight? Is it, and people don't understand the traditions. There are traditions that say it is the 27th. It is the uneven nights of Ramadan. It's in the first 10 of Ramadan, the middle 10, the latter 10. So when is it? There are even traditions saying that Laylatul Qadr is outside of Ramadan. So from a quantitative perspective, a clock time perspective, these traditions mess everything up. When is Laylatul Qadr? And the whole point is that theologians emphasized, it is a qualitative statement. It doesn't matter. What is the only obligation that you need to do in relation to Laylatul Qadr is to try to find it. They emphasize this constantly. Your only obligation is to have the intent to pray in Laylatul Qadr. You don't need to know exactly when Laylatul Qadr is, because there's almost no type of designation to really know it. There are some traditions that say when the sun has this sort of, when light has this sort of redness to it, etc., etc. But at the same time, those are very unclear. Most people don't experience it. So Laylatul Qadr, if you experience Laylatul Qadr or not, is unknown, because it's a qualitative experience of time, not a quantitative experience of time. Laylatul Qadr is not a calendar moment. Laylatul Qadr as a sacred time is experienced, is created even, is participating. You participate in Laylatul Qadr through your acts. You intend to experience Laylatul Qadr. You pray extra. You do all these extra things in the hope that they coincide with Laylatul Qadr. Those are the things that create sacred time. Not the calendar moment, is it the 27th or not? And this is, again, one of the beauties about the Islamic worldview that is very important to teach ourselves and our children, is that it does something extra. We don't deny the scientific worldview, but we add a qualitative aspect to it. We add an aspect to it. Our worldview is larger than the scientific worldview. Yes. Our worldview is bigger than it. And our psychology is bigger than the normal psychology of time that most people experience. We have an extra temporal mode. We have an extra temporal culture that non-believers don't experience in that way. Mm-hmm. And that's the fascinating thing, is we create sacred time by doing sacred acts. So you do sadaqah, you pray, you fast, or all types of movements, and movement creates time. And therefore the intent is important, because if you intend, like for example, you cannot fast by accident. You have to intend it. Why? Because then it activates the temporal mode, the temporal culture. It creates sacred time. Yeah, and this again only makes sense from a theistic paradigm. Yeah, so be aware. We as Muslims need to be aware. Do I look at these things, at the Qur'an, at prayer, at all these elements in Islam that defines us as Muslims? Do I view these from a theistic paradigm or from an cosmological paradigm? It's very, very important. Biochemistry, you do that from a cosmological paradigm, even as a Muslim. But to explain where the universe comes from, then theism kicks in. Sometimes I see people, you see this on TikTok and Instagram, when you pray and you put your head on the floor, it takes away energy, bad energy from you, etc. So they try to use cosmological explanations, like physical benefits of prayer. Yes, those are there. Same thing with fasting. There are physical benefits of fasting. But the thing is, the whole idea of the rituals of Islam is they are not defined by their effects in the physical world. They are defined by the larger worldview they are acted on. So yeah, that's my talk.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much indeed. Oh, there you are. I'll put some links in the description below as well, so people can read up what we're talking about. So thank you very much indeed, Yasin, for your fascinating presentation. A very rich, deep, theological and spiritual, and also material as well. Beautiful. The interconnectedness of reality is absolutely fascinating. It's one of the amazingly attractive things about Islam compared to other worldviews, I think. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you as well for having me.
Until next time. Bye-bye.
Inshallah.